So if we look at the context of sustainability and life cycle assessment, scaling means that we are no longer thinking in studies. And currently there's a lot of ISO standardization work going on in reviewing LCA standards and also the carbon footprint standard. And there still, we always talk about the study. So we are talking about a product carbon footprint or a life cycle assessment, and we define individually a goal and scope, and then we say we are making a report, and this report then is probably critically reviewed and can then be published. This is past and to a certain extent still the present. But when we want to scale, we cannot say we want to do that for 1 or 2 products, also not for 10 or 20 or even 100. We have companies that have been several hundreds of LCA studies in the past with a workforce of a group of 10, 20, 15 LCA experts in their organization. You have sometimes quite a big group of that and making great work in that. But now, especially with product carbon footprinting, we want to assess all products of an organization, the full portfolio at the same time. And because it's not a study, we want to see how the performance of a product from one generation to the next generation, from an internal perspective, is improving the environmental performance. So saying it's not only now more efficient, and using less material and having better function, is also demonstrating that it's less product carbon footprint or less environmental impacts. So even if companies are only for the reporting externally, for sharing with their clients, are needing at the moment product carbon footprints, they still internally also need life cycle assessment at scale, because you don't want to create trade-offs. So if you want to assess that your product, the next generation, 10% less product carbon footprint than the old one, you also want to make sure that if someone asks, okay, you improved in terms of global warming potential for the product carbon footprint, what happened to the other impact categories related to the environment, like eutrophication, acidification? Are they worse, the same, or even also improved? And you want that information at least to have it available, and especially in decision making for deciding for new materials, for new designs. You want to see them. You want to see that you're not creating a big trade-off between different impact categories, because burden shifting is evil. So it needs to be avoided. I justified more why it's important. So what scaling really means, that you define a goal and scope for all your products that is sufficiently specific that it applies to what you want with that data for everything, but it's sufficiently general that it can apply to all of your products. And that is quite an exercise that companies have to do. And we are very often asked, okay, how can we scale it? How can we do that? And then we are asking, why do you want that? What is the information and what is the use case and what is the job to be done you're supporting with that information that you want out of your scaled lifecycle assessment and product carbon footprint process? And so to have clear what is the uses of that information is shaping what data you need, who needs to be involved, what internal data, what external data, how much do you need to involve your supplier and your supply chain. So having that clear, what are the uses, is super important. And it's not always a no-brainer that everyone can say, oh, I want this and this and this and this. So we have to clarify that before scaling and before giving advice on how to scale.